It is June 1944. A twin-engine Mosquito bomber is flying over the North Atlantic. The pilot is a 27-year-old American civilian with no college degree and no military rank. He is ferrying the plane to Scotland for the Royal Air Force, a distance of 2,200 miles on a fuel tank built for 1,200. He is betting his life on a tailwind. 2 hours past the point of no return, the wind dies. The fuel gauge drops towards empty. When he finally reaches Scotland, the fog is too thick to land. He kicks open the jettison hatch and bails out into the freezing darkness. He survives, and decades later, when he asked to reflect on a career that saw him build the largest hotels in the world, buy and sell the MGM 3 times, and amass a fortune of $16 billion, he does not talk about strategy or management theory. He says, quote, "Life is a big craps game, and I've got to tell you it's all been fun. I was a small businessman with a gambling habit and a junior high school education who parlayed a few $1,000s into a $16 billion empire. His name is Kirk Kerkorian, and this is the story of the most calculated gambler in American business history. A man who started with nothing, inherited nothing, and built a $16 billion fortune by treating every deal like a hand of high-stakes poker. I'm Nico Ludwig, the founder of Collateral Partners, the financial storytelling firm. If you've seen our documentaries on Trammell Crow or Sam Zell, you know that we study the titans of the industry to understand the principles that separate the good from the legendary. When we started researching Kirk Kerkorian, we expected to find a reclusive billionaire who got lucky in Las Vegas. What we found instead was something far more interesting and far more instructive. We found a man who treated every business decision like a hand of poker. He studied the odds. He sized up the other players. He knew exactly when to bet big and exactly when to walk away. And he always kept the back door open. His biographer, Dial Togerson, called him, quote, "the nicest guy who ever took over a corporation," and described his career as a, quote, "lifelong pattern of taking carefully calculated risks, of gauging all the variables in a financial undertaking, and then staking everything on one bold decision." Over the next 10 chapters, we're going to trace how a kid from a watermelon ranch in Weed Patch, California, with an 8th grade education, parlayed $12,000 in wartime savings into a $16 billion empire. This is the story of the calculated gambler. It is a masterclass in risk. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Outsider's Origin. The timeline here is from 1917 till 1944. Kirk Kerkorian was born in Fresno, California in 1917, the youngest of 4 children born to Armenian immigrants. His father, Aaron, had come to America around 1905, fleeing the upheaval in Turkey, and settled in California's Central Valley to farm fruit. For a few years, the family had stability. Then the 1921 recession hit. The bank called in their loans, and the Kerkorian family lost everything. What followed was a childhood of constant displacement. Kerkorian told Fortune magazine in 1969, quote, "We moved at least 20 times when I was a kid. We would often not pay our rent and would get booted after a few months. It was a constant battle just to keep a roof over our heads." That kind of instability does something to a person. It either breaks you or it makes you immune to the fear. For Kerkorian, it did the latter. He grew up fast. He learned that nothing was permanent, that comfort would be taken away overnight, and that the only thing you could count on was your own ability to adapt. He dropped out of school after 8th grade to help support his family. He sold newspapers on street corners. He hauled ice. He did whatever it took to put food on the table. At 17, he joined the Civilian Conservation Corps, earning $30 a month, and somewhere along the line, he found the boxing ring, fighting under the name, quote, "Rifle Right Kerkorian." He stepped to the ring 33 times and only lost 4 bouts. A friend later said, quote, "Kirk was like a chess player in the ring. Every punch was calculated. Every step was measured." If you've seen our documentary on Boone Pickens, you'll remember that Pickens also learned his competitive instincts young, running a paper route across the roughest parts of town. Kerkorian's education was similar. The ring taught him timing, discipline, and how to absorb punishment without panicking. Those are the same skills that would later take him to billions of dollars. But it was flying that would change everything. Kerkorian took lessons from a barnstormer named Ted O'Flaherty, paying $3 for a half hour of airtime. When World War II broke out, his lack of high school diploma barred him from the military as a pilot. So he did what any calculated gambler would do. He forged his transcripts and joined the Royal Air Force Ferry Command as a civilian contractor. His job was to fly unarmed bombers across the North Atlantic to Scotland. These were not combat missions, they were delivery runs. They were arguably more dangerous. The weather was brutal, navigation was primitive, and the planes had no weapons, no armor, and barely enough fuel. The casualty rate was staggering. One brutal winter, only a quarter of the planes completed the crossing. Kerkorian delivered 33 planes over 2 years. He called his $1,000 monthly paycheck, quote, "the first real loot I ever saw." When the war ended, he had $12,000 in savings. That was real money for a kid who grew up getting evicted every few months. But the money was almost besides the point. What Kerkorian brought home from the war was something more valuable: a complete comfort with extreme risk. He had stared down death dozens of times and survived. After that, risking money on a business deal was never going to keep him up at night. The key insight here is that extreme risk tolerance is forged in early hardship. Surviving poverty and war makes financial risk feel like a game you already know how to play. Chapter 2. The Plane Trader. The timeline here is from 1945 to 1962. After the war, thousands of surplus military aircraft flooded the American market. The government was selling them for pennies on the dollar. Most people saw scrap metal. Kerkorian saw arbitrage. He flew to Hawaii and bought surplus Douglas DC-3 airplanes for as little as $7,000 each. Then he piloted them back to the mainland, where commercial airlines desperate to expand were paying up to $60,000 per plane. Think about that for a moment. He was buying an asset in one market, physically moving it to another market, and capturing the 8-to-1 return. He was literally flying his own inventory across the Pacific Ocean. Luck had nothing to do with it. At 28 years old, Kerkorian already understood that panic creates mispricing, and mispricing creates opportunity. It is the same principle that every great distress investor has used since. From Sam Zell buying foreclosed apartments in the 1970s to Warren Buffett buying Goldman Sachs in 2008. Kerkorian figured it out in 1945 with no formal training, sitting in the cockpit of a surplus DC-3. One deal in particular shows how his mind worked. The British Overseas Airways Corporation lost a Lockheed Constellation in a crash in Switzerland. The plane was declared a total loss. Kerkorian flew to Europe, inspected the wreck, and bought it for $150,000. He spent another $330,000 on repairs. He then sold the restored plane to El Al, Israel's national airline, for $750,000, more than $250,000 in profit on a plane everyone else had written off. But what really set Kerkorian apart was knowing when to sell. His longest associate, Arnold McGraw, recalled the decision that baffled everyone around him. Kerkorian decided to sell a fleet of DC-4 airplanes when the market was hot. Quote, "Everyone thought he was nuts to sell, me included," McGraw said. But a few months afterward, the price of DC-4s came down to $100,000. When asked about his timing, Kerkorian gave an answer that became his unofficial motto. Quote, "After the fact, it always looks like good timing. It's just that I don't try to get all the meat off the bone. When I get a good figure, I just move something. Too many people try to hit the peak price, and they hold on until it's too late." That quote is the entire Kerkorian playbook in 4 sentences. Do not get greedy. Take the profit when it is there. Let someone else chase the last dollar. This is the discipline that separates calculated gamblers from reckless ones. The key insight here is leave meat on the bone for the next buyer. The greatest investors exit before the market turns, letting someone else chase the last dollar. Chapter 3. The Airline Gambit. The timeline here is from 1962 until 1968. Kerkorian's plane trading days taught him how to flip assets, but he wanted something bigger. He wanted cash flow. He wanted an enterprise. In the early 1960s, he acquired a small charter airline called Los Angeles Air Service, which shuttled gamblers between LA and Las Vegas. It was a modest operation, but Kerkorian saw the potential. He renamed it Trans International Airlines and began expanding. In 1962, he made a move that was audacious for a small charter carrier. He bought a jet aircraft, financing it through the Douglas Aircraft and Bank of America. It was a multi-million-dollar bet, but Kerkorian had a principle that governed every major risk he ever took. Forbes magazine described it perfectly, saying, quote, "Keeping the back door open was a favorite phrase when he bought a new plane. If the airline did not grow fast enough, he could always resell the jet to another carrier and recoup his capital." The bet had a built-in safety net. Trans International grew rapidly. Kerkorian added routes, upgraded equipment, and built the company into one of the largest supplemental carriers in the country. Revenue climbed and the fleet expanded. And then Kerkorian did what he always did. He sold at the top. In 1968, he sold Trans International to Transamerica Corporation in a stock swap. When Transamerica's stock soared, Kerkorian's stake multiplied. In less than a decade, he had turned his wartime savings into a 9-figure fortune. Who used to get evicted every few months was now worth more than $250 million. But he was not done with airlines. He quietly accumulated share in Western Airlines, eventually building a stake of nearly 30% of the company. Forbes reported that he, quote, "scared the hell out of the people at Western. Investors knew sooner or later he would sell it. Was he going to take over? Was he going to strip the assets?" The uncertainty itself became a tool. Eventually, Kerkorian sold his controlling block back to Western at a significant premium, pocketing $30 million. As Forbes noted, quote, "He used the airline as a trading position, not as a long-term hold. Buy low, create pressure, and then sell high." It was the same playbook he'd used with surplus planes, just at a much larger scale. The key insight here is that the most powerful position in any negotiation is the ability to walk away. There's 2 reasons why I made this film. The first is I love telling financial stories, and the second is I want to tell yours. I'm the founder of Collateral Partners. We help investment firms and operating businesses close the gap between who they actually are and how they're perceived. We have finance people who understand your business and designers who make you look institutional, and that combination doesn't exist anywhere else. So if you're raising capital, closing clients, or recruiting talent, and you're tired of competitors who just present themselves better, click the link below. Let's get on a call and audit your materials versus your leading competitors, and let's close the gap. Chapter 4, Vegas before Vegas. The timeline here is from 1962 until 1969. While building his airline business, Kerkorian was also studying Las Vegas. He had been flying gamblers to the city for years, and he understood something that most people missed. Vegas was about more than gambling. It was the epicenter of leisure, and leisure was about to become the biggest growth industry in America. He told Fortune, quote, "Wages are going higher and hours are getting shorter. People have got to have a place to spend their money." Fortune noted that, quote, "He maintains that all of his disparate ventures are tied together by a common thread, the exploitation of leisure." But Kerkorian's first Vegas bet was a disaster. In 1955, he invested $50,000 in the Dunes Hotel. The management was terrible, the operation bled money, and Kerkorian lost his entire stake. He later reflected, quote, "I learned then not to invest in a business that I didn't run. That lesson changed everything. From this point forward, Kerkorian would never again be a passive investor in someone else's operation. If he was going to bet, he was going to control the entire table." His next move was brilliant. In 1962, he bought 80 acres of barren desert across from the Flamingo Hotel for $900,000. Everyone thought he was crazy. It was just sand and sagebrush. But Kerkorian saw what the city would become. Actor George Raft recalled a conversation where Kerkorian told him, quote, "George, they haven't even scratched the surface yet. Las Vegas will be a great place." He leased the land to the developers of Caesar's Palace, one of the most ambitious casino projects of the era. Over several years, the rent checks totaled $2 million. Then he sold the land itself for $5 million. Total return on a $900,000 investment was roughly $7 million. That is the type of return that venture capitalists dream about. And Kerkorian did it with a patch of desert. Flush with capital, Kerkorian made his most ambitious gamble yet. He decided to build the International Hotel, the largest resort in the world. 30 stories, 1,500 rooms, the biggest showroom in Las Vegas. The total cost was $54 million. To finance it, he secured a $73 million unsecured loan from Bank of America. Unsecured. That meant the bank let him $73 million, basically entirely on his word. Bank of America Vice Chairman Alden Clausen explained why. Kerkorian was a, quote, man of his word, a man of high integrity. When the International Hotel opened in 1969, it was a sensation. Barbra Streisand opened the showroom. Elvis Presley followed her and launched his legendary Las Vegas residency. The hotel had 1,500 rooms, 28 blackjack tables, 825 slot machines, and a baccarat game that never shut down. Kerkorian had built the biggest hotel in the world, and he had done it with other people's money, backed by nothing but his reputation and his word. If you've seen our documentary on Trammell Crow, you will remember that Crow also understood the power of building with leverage and reputation. But where Crow built through partnership, Kerkorian operated alone. He was a solo gambler at the highest stakes table in the world. The key insight here was that the house always wins, but the landlord beats the house. By owning the ground beneath Caesar's palace, Kerkorian captured the upside of the casino boom without taking any of the operational risk. Chapter 5, the MGM Raid. The timeline here is from 1969 to 1973. By 1969, Kerkorian's net worth had reached nearly $272 million. He had conquered aviation and was reshaping Las Vegas. Now he turned his attention to Hollywood. In a move that stunned Wall Street, Kerkorian launched a hostile tender offer for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Forbes captured the bewilderment perfectly. Quote, a good many people are mystified by Las Vegas tycoon Kirk Kerkorian's tender offer for movie-making MGM. Why would a casino and an airline guy want a struggling movie studio? The answer is that Kerkorian saw past the movie studio facade. He recognized a distressed asset with enormous hidden value. One analyst explained, quote, the traditional sound from MGM is the lion's roar. Under Kerkorian, it became the rattle of his dice. Once in control, Kerkorian moved fast. He installed new management and then launched a ruthless restructuring. The legendary prop department, home to Dorothy's ruby slippers and Rhett Butler's smoking jacket, was auctioned off to the highest bidder. Overseas theaters were liquidated. Production budgets were slashed. Hollywood was horrified. The old guard called him a barbarian, a cultural vandal, a man who did not understand the magic of the movies. Kerkorian did not care. He had heard it all before. When he built the International Hotel, people said he was over his head. When he bought the West Airline stock, people said he was a corporate raider with no business being in aviation. Every time, the critics were wrong. Kerkorian ignored the movie business entirely. He operated strictly in the asset business. His lawyer, Gregson Botzer, marveled at how quickly Kerkorian mastered the studio's complex finances. Quote, he's a very quick study, Botzer said. In the end, he became more knowledgeable about MGM than I was. They wrote that, quote, Kerkorian is buying into a built-in turnaround and called MGM a, quote, sensational turnabout waiting to happen. The MGM treasurer, when asked if the studio could be profitable, replied simply, quote, well, yes, of course. Kerkorian's real masterstroke was extending the MGM brand into Las Vegas. He used the iconic name to build the MGM Grand Hotel, transforming intangible cultural capital into tangible real estate value. He acquired more than a studio. He captured a brand that he could leverage across his entire empire. A 1997 profile captured the full arc. Quote, after 2 unsuccessful attempts, Kirk Kerkorian is trying again to win respect in Hollywood. This is the billionaire's 3rd try, and unquestionably last try at making a success of a company that he has owned or controlled off and on for more than a quarter century. The profile also noted that, quote, Kerkorian is an intensely shy man who hates small talk, and that, quote, with his pugless nose and working man's mane, Kerkorian was once mistaken for a car hop. He never did fit in Hollywood. He did not need to. The parties meant nothing to him. The assets meant everything, and the assets delivered. Kerkorian used MGM's leverage to extract value in ways that traditional studio executives never imagined. As one analysis noted, MGM was carrying, quote, $700 million in debt against shareholder equity of only $279 million. That kind of leverage would terrify most executives. Kerkorian saw it as a tool. He'd been using leverage since his first airplane purchase, and he understood that debt, when properly managed, is calculated gambler's best friend. The key insight here is look beneath the surface. The real value of a company often lies in its assets, not its current operations. Chapter 6, The Asset Shuffler. The timeline here is from 1973 to 1990. What Kerkorian did with the MGM over the next 2 decades is one of the most remarkable financial engineering stories in American history. He bought it, sold it, bought it back, merged it, split it, and sold it again. Each time he made money. The defining move came in 1981 when he acquired United Artists and merged it with MGM, creating a combined entity with a massive film library. A 1985 Forbes article described the financial engineering behind the MGM UA structure as one of the most complex deals in Hollywood history, noting that Kerkorian had, quote, used leverage before in making successive fortunes in airlines, gambling, and movie companies. Now he was applying that same complex financial engineering to split MGM and United Artists. He was applying the same playbook across every industry he touched. Then in 1986, he sold the entire MGM UA empire to Ted Turner for $1.5 billion. But Turner overextended himself. Within months, he was facing a liquidity crisis. And Kerkorian, true to his form, was waiting. He bought back the MGM name, the studio lot, the production company for a fraction of what he just sold them for. Forbes described his approach perfectly, saying, quote, reshuffling seems to be Kerkorian's favorite tactic. His motive has always been a profit before the glitter of making movies. Boutzer estimated that the 950 title film library alone, quote, could be worth anywhere between $800 and $1 billion. Kerkorian had sold Turner the library at a premium and then bought everything else at a discount. It was a masterclass in financial engineering. Forbes was so impressed that they imagined his story as a movie. Quote, maybe MGM UA ought to make a movie about the man who controls it, the secretive Kirk Kerkorian. How about Clint Eastwood as the taciturn loner playing by his own rules? The comparison was apt. Kerkorian played by his own rules, and he played alone. Another Forbes piece noted that, quote, he operates by remote control through well-paid executives and fiercely loyal advisors. He was rarely seen in boardrooms. He never gave speeches. He let the deals speak for themselves. And yet, as one article observed, he was, quote, a somewhat controversial but undeniably brilliant financier who avoids publicity but nevertheless attracts it. The MGM saga also revealed the tension that followed Kerkorian throughout his career. Forbes noted that, quote, while Kerkorian is driving everyone crazy with his reclusive ways, Wall Street punished his stock. His approach frustrated analysts who wanted traditional guidance. Kerkorian preferred to let his structural moves dictate the narrative. If you've seen our documentary on Sam Zell, you will remember that Zell also understood the power of being a contrarian, of buying what everyone else was selling. Kerkorian operated with that same contrarian instinct, but where Zell was colorful and quotable, Kerkorian was a ghost. Both approaches worked. The lesson is that there's no single playbook for building a fortune. There's only the discipline to buy when others panic and sell when others get greedy. The key insight here is to treat every transaction as a new hand. The best asset traders actively reshuffle their portfolios when the market misprices them. Chapter 7, The Chrysler Play. The timeline here is from 1990 to 1998. In the early 1990s, Kerkorian turned his attention to an industry he had never touched before, automobiles. His target was Chrysler Corporation. Chrysler had nearly gone bankrupt in the early 1980s, saved only by a government bailout and the charisma of Lee Iacocca. By the early 1990s, the company had staged a remarkable turnaround under Iacocca and his successor, Robert Lutz. Lutz captured the new Chrysler mindset perfectly. Quote, we've moved beyond never again. We've moved on to why not? The company had staged a remarkable turnaround, but the market refused to see it. Despite the turnaround, Wall Street was still pricing Chrysler like a company on the verge of collapse. The stock was cheap relative to the company's cash reserves and earnings power. Kerkorian saw a classic contrarian mispricing, the same kind of opportunity he had been exploiting since he bought that surplus airplane in Hawaii. He began quietly accumulating shares. By the time the market noticed, his stake had grown to nearly 10% of the company, worth over $1.5 billion. Kerkorian was his own catalyst. He would generate headlines, which created a mystique around his name. It was a very convincing story because he wasn't just talking the talk, he was also walking the walk. That is a critical distinction. Kerkorian understood that the ultimate form of strategic communication is decisive action. His capital deployment sent a message that no one could ignore. When a man puts $1.5 billion in your stock, that is the loudest message that the market could receive. This approach was similar to what Boone Pickens had done in the oil industry a decade earlier. But where Pickens relied on vocal campaigns, Kerkorian used overwhelming financial leverage to force the conversation. He pressed Chrysler's board to buy back shares and raise dividends, unlocking hidden value that Wall Street had been ignoring. The board resisted at first, but with Kerkorian holding 10% of the company, they could not ignore him forever. Eventually, Chrysler expanded its buyback program and the stock began to re-rate. The climax came in 1998 when Daimler-Benz acquired Chrysler in what billed as a merger of equals. Kerkorian's stake had appreciated enormously from his original cost basis. He walked away with a massive profit. The entire play had taken years of patience. He had identified an undervalued asset, applied quiet but relentless pressure, and waited for the market to recognize what he already knew. It was a surplus airplane playbook scaled up to the Fortune 500. Around the same time, Kerkorian pulled off another remarkable play. In 1991, he engineered a deal to gain control of Trans World Airlines with almost no money at risk. Carl Icahn, who was running TWA at the time, was furious. He told Forbes, quote, "Kerkorian has a seat in a high-stakes game in which everyone else has to put up chips, but he's playing with no chips." Forbes called it, quote, "poker without chips." That quote captures something essential about Kerkorian. He evolved beyond a traditional gambler. Kerkorian had figured out how to play with the house's money. The key insight here is that strategic communication requires more than words. It requires leverage. When you back your narrative with $1.5 billion, the board has no choice but to listen. Chapter 8. The Mirage Acquisition. The timeline here is from 2000 to 2007. At the turn of the millennium, Kerkorian was in his 80s. Most men his age were long retired. Kerkorian was about to make the biggest bet of his career. In 2000, his company MGM Grand launched a hostile takeover of Steve Wynn's Mirage Resorts. The price tag was staggering, $6.3 billion in cash and assumed debt, representing a nearly 300% premium over Mirage's stock price. Forbes ran a piece titled "Crazy Like a Fox." That answered the question. "Everyone knows Kirk Kerkorian loves a bargain," they wrote, and then they did the math. Tally it all up, and Kerkorian ends up paying as little as 7.5 times Mirage's expected operating income, a small price for a dominant position in the industry. That is the key phrase. Dominant position. Kerkorian looked beyond the casino floor. He was acquiring control of the Las Vegas Strip, the Mirage, the Bellagio, Treasure Island. Combined with his existing MGM Grand properties, he would own more hotel rooms and casino floor than anyone in the history of the city. Over the next 7 years, Kerkorian rode the Las Vegas boom to extraordinary heights. He launched City Center, an $8.6 billion mega resort that was one of the most ambitious development projects in the city's history. Forbes noted in 2008 that the company was, quote, "remaking MGM Mirage from a debt-heavy casino builder into a diversified real estate developer that uses other people's money for expansion." By 2007, Kerkorian's net worth had reached an estimated $16 billion. He had started with $12,000 in wartime savings. The compounding was almost incomprehensible. A man who once ferried bombers for $1,000 a month had built one of the largest personal fortunes on earth. And he had done it his way, without a college degree, without a Wall Street pedigree, without ever giving a single interview that he did not absolutely have to give. A 1991 Vegas industry profile captured the essence of his approach. Kerkorian understood that Las Vegas was, quote, a full-service entertainment destination that evolved far beyond a simple gambling town. While others focus on the casino floor, Kerkorian was thinking about the entire ecosystem: the hotels, the restaurants, the convention centers, the entertainment venues. He looked past the blackjack tables. He placed his chips on American appetite for leisure, for spectacle, and for escape. And for decades, that bet paid off spectacularly. The key insight here is that a premium price is a bargain if it buys you absolute market dominance. Chapter 9, The Fall. The timeline here is from 2008 to 2010. Then the music stopped. The scale of the crisis cannot be overstated. Las Vegas was ground zero for the real estate collapse. Half-finished casino projects dotted the strip like monuments to a bygone era of easy credit. City Center, Kerkorian's most ambitious project to date, was burning through millions of dollars a day. The banks that had eagerly financed his previous deals were now fighting for their own survival. But Kerkorian had been here before. He had seen the 1921 recession wipe out his father. He had navigated the stagflation of the 1970s and the market crash of 1987. He understood that in a liquidity crisis, cash is the only thing that matters. He ruthlessly prioritized survival over ego. The 2008 financial crisis hit Las Vegas harder than almost anywhere else in America. Tourism collapsed entirely. Conventions were canceled. Credit markets froze. City Center was still under construction. It was hemorrhaging cash with no financing in sight. MGM Mirage's stock cratered. Kerkorian's net worth plunged from $16 billion to roughly $3 billion. A loss of $15 billion in a matter of months. For most people, losing $15 billion would be a catastrophe that triggers panic, lawsuits, and public meltdowns. Kerkorian said absolutely nothing. He avoided the media circus. He maintained absolute message discipline. He simply went to work. An industry profile from 1991 noted that Kerkorian's projects were designed to, quote, pull in family vacationers by the millions, creating a diversified revenue stream that could survive economic downturns. That structural discipline, forged over many decades, served him well in the crisis. If the largest shareholder of MGM Mirage showed panic, the stock would have collapsed further. Creditors would have called in their loans, and the entire empire could have unraveled. Instead, Kerkorian quietly restructured the company's debt. He secured emergency financing for City Center. He worked out with his executives to cut costs and preserve cash. He sold his stake in Ford Motor Company at a loss to raise liquidity. He made the hard calls that needed to be made without drama, without excuses, and with absolute message discipline. The project survived, the company survived, and Kerkorian survived. A 1971 profile noted that his early real estate deals made him, quote, bullish about the whole business of travel, entertainment, and leisure time. He understood that the real money extended far beyond the casinos, into the entire ecosystem of leisure. That was exactly what happened during the crisis. While the rest of the industry panicked, Kerkorian was quietly repositioning. This was the same man who had bailed out of a fuel-starved bomber over Scotland in 1944. The same man who absorbed punches in 33 boxing matches. The same man who watched his father lose everything in the 1921 recession. Kerkorian had been absorbing losses his entire life. A stock market crash was just another round in the ring. He never fully recovered the $16 billion, but he did not need to. By the time of his death, his fortune was still measured in billions. He had taken the worst financial crisis in 80 years and survived it with his entire empire intact. Most of his peers were not so fortunate. Across Wall Street and across Las Vegas, fortunes were wiped out entirely. Kerkorian endured because he had spent a lifetime learning how to take a punch. The key insight here is that true risk tolerance is the ability to absorb catastrophic losses without losing your nerve. Chapter 10, Legacy. The timeline here is from 2010 to 2015. Kirk Kerkorian died on June 15, 2015 at the age of 98. He left behind a fortune, a transformed Las Vegas, and a reputation that defied easy categorization. He was a World War II aviator, a plane trader, an airplane builder, a Las Vegas pioneer, a Hollywood raider, an activist investor, and a philanthropist who gave away hundreds of millions of dollars, mostly to Armenian causes, almost entirely in secret. He lived in a modest one-bedroom guest house above Beverly Hills, not a mansion. He drove himself to meetings. He ate at the same restaurants. The trappings of wealth never interested him. The game did. His biographer, William Rempel, described him as, quote, one of the least known of America's richest men. In a 1969 Fortune interview, when asked why he kept making massive bets, described having more money than he could ever spend, Kerkorian said, quote, there was a time when I'd been aiming at $100,000. Then I thought I'd have it made if I got to $1 million. Now, it isn't the money. When pressed on what did drive him, he replied with a grin, quote, what would you want me to do? Sit with a mint julep in my hand? That exchange revealed the relentless engine beneath his stoic exterior. He could have retired comfortably in 1968 after selling Trans International. He could have retired after the Caesar Palace land deal. He could have retired after selling MGM to Ted Turner for $1.5 billion. Instead, he kept playing. At an age when most men were sitting on a porch, Kerkorian was launching hostile takeovers and building $8.6 billion mega resorts. Not because he needed the money, but because the game itself was the point. His approach to business was like anyone else we've studied in the series. He told Fortune, quote, I just tend to get dissatisfied easily and want to do something else. And when asked about his management style, he said equally blunt, quote, I've never cared for day-to-day operations. He avoided daily operations. He lived for the deal. He saw the world as a series of undervalued assets waiting to be repriced. When Fortune compared him to Howard Hughes, the other reclusive Las Vegas billionaire, Kerkorian deflected with characteristic humility. Quote, he is a mountain, but I am a molehill. He was wrong about that. Kerkorian was no molehill. By the time he died, he'd built and rebuilt the Las Vegas Strip more than any single person in history. He bought and resold MGM 3 times. He forced Chrysler to unblock billions in shareholder value. He'd survived the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, and he had done it all with just an 8th grade education. The final line of that 1969 Forbes article is the most revealing thing that Kerkorian ever said. When the reporter asked him about his lack of formal credentials, Kerkorian replied simply, quote, I lacked the education. He said it without apology, because he knew that the instincts required to build a $16 billion empire cannot be taught in a classroom. They are forged in harsher places, in the cockpit of a freezing bomber over the Atlantic, in the boxing rings of Los Angeles, in the boardrooms where he waged billions with a gambler's calm. Kerkorian never wrote a memoir. He never gave a commencement speech. He carefully guarded his public image. He let his deals tell his story. And what a story they tell. From $12,000 to $16 billion. From a watermelon ranch in Weed Patch, California, to the top of the Las Vegas Strip. From an 8th grade dropout to the man who reshaped 3 American industries. Kirk Kerkorian was the ultimate calculated gambler, and he played the game better than anyone. The key insight here is that mastery in business comes from instincts developed through real-world risk, not from textbooks. Kirk Kerkorian's story is the ultimate testament to the power of calculated risk. He started with $12,000 in an 8th grade education. He ended with $16 billion in a legacy that reshaped 3 American industries. Every deal he made followed the same pattern. Study the odds, size up the players, and bet big when the table tilts in your favor. And lastly, always keep the back door open. Kerkorian was the ultimate outsider who bought America, one calculated gamble at a time, and he played the game better than anyone. This is the story of Kirk Kerkorian. A quick thank you to Adam Mortanian and Tyler Shigerian, my good friends and clients at Pact Capital, on the recommendation for this story. If you haven't, please go watch our first story on Trammell Crow, the second one on Boone Pickens, and the third one on Sam Zell. This is the 4th story. If you like it, we will continue to do this. One more thing. This film took 7 people weeks to create. Our goal is to produce content like this every single week. Netflix production on the greatest stories in finance and business. And if you want to see more of this, like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. That's how we keep this going.